Don't leave!
I don't belong here. Please, I love you.
And I love her.
I can't do this to them.
Don't touch her! Rosie's tiny white sneaker slid across the polished marble as two security guards twisted Mason Reed's arm behind his back and dragged him away from the gold-trimmed doors of the Ashford Estate Chapel. Inside, beneath a ceiling of crystal and imported roses, the bride turned just in time to hear a little girl scream, "Daddy!" And before I tell you why a billionaire's wedding stopped breathing in that exact second, take one heartbeat and subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story starts cruel, gets worse, and by the end, it may leave you staring at the screen long after it's over. Mason wasn't supposed to be there. That much was obvious to everybody with a champagne glass in their hand and a custom suit on their shoulders. He stood out in a jacket that fit a little too tight across the chest, shoes polished but old, jaw unshaven from a sleepless night, and a 7-year-old daughter clutching his fingers like the world had teeth. The head of security looked him over like he was something damp dragged in from the street. "Invitation." "I told you," Mason said, trying not to yank his arm free too hard because Rosie was already trembling. "I'm not here for the reception. I just need 60 seconds with Claire." The guard laughed in his face. "Men like you always need 60 seconds with rich people on their wedding day." Rosie tightened against him. "Daddy?" Mason swallowed. "Please, tell her Mason Reed is here." That name should have meant nothing, but inside the chapel, it meant everything. Claire Ashford had been standing at the front, one hand around a bouquet of white orchids, the other resting at her side so no one would notice the faint shake in it. The string quartet was still playing. 200 guests were smiling. Her groom, Damian Sterling, had just leaned in to whisper something polished and expensive into her ear. Then she heard that name, Mason Reed. For a second, Claire forgot she was a bride. She forgot the veil, the cameras, the investors seated in the front row, the merger disguised as a marriage, the reporters outside, her family names stitched into every flower arrangement like a warning. She turned and saw the father she had once loved being shoved out of her wedding in front of everyone. One of the guards pushed Mason harder than he meant to. Rosie stumbled. Her knees hit the marble. The sound she made wasn't loud. That's what made it awful. It was that soft, startled cry children make when humiliation hurts worse than pain. Mason dropped to her instantly, despite the grip on his arm. "Rosie, Rosie, baby, look at me." Her lip shook. "I didn't do anything." That was the line that tore through Claire harder than the scream. "I didn't do anything." It sounded too much like a memory. 9 years earlier, Claire had said almost the same thing to her father while he stood between her and the life she wanted. "I just fell in love." Back then, Arthur Ashford had looked at his daughter with the cold patience only powerful men could afford. And now, from the altar where she was supposed to say yes forever, Claire watched history drag itself back into the room, wearing a tired suit and holding a crying child. "Mason!" she shouted. The quartet stopped so abruptly that the last violin notes snapped in the air. Every head turned. Even the guards froze. Damian's smile disappeared. Claire lifted her dress and ran. Not walked, not hurried, ran. The bride of the century ran down the aisle, past the lilies, past the billionaires, past her own mother gasping into a gloved hand, and out through the chapel doors, barefoot because one heel had slipped off somewhere behind her and she didn't care enough to go back for it. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the stone steps hard. Mason had just gotten Rosie into his arms when Claire reached them. Up close, he looked older than the man she remembered. Not old, just used by life. There were fine lines near his eyes that hadn't been there before, a faint scar near his chin, a tiredness in him that no sleep could fix. And in the pocket of his coat, something rectangular pressed against the fabric like a second heartbeat. Claire stopped 3 feet away. For a second, neither of them spoke. Rosie buried her face in Mason's neck. The wind lifted Claire's veil and pushed it across her shoulder like a ghost trying to pull her back inside. When she finally spoke, her voice came out thin. "Why are you here?" Mason looked at her the way starving people look at locked doors. Then he said quietly, "Don't marry Damien." Claire's eyes hardened instantly. "You show up after 9 years, bring your daughter to my wedding, get thrown out in front of half the city, and that's your opening line?" Mason didn't flinch. "He killed my wife." The world did not stop. That was the strange part. A fountain still sprayed behind them. Somewhere inside, glasses still clinked because a few guests hadn't realized anything was wrong yet. A photographer kept snapping instinctively from the doorway until someone shoved his camera down. But inside Claire, something did stop. "He what?" Mason lowered Rosie carefully to the ground. She stayed glued to his leg. "I didn't come here to beg for money. I didn't come to ruin you. I came because if you marry him today, he owns the last thing your father left you, and whatever truth is still alive dies with it." Claire stared at him. Then the old wound arrived right on time. "Truth," she said, almost laughing. "You want to use that word with me?" Mason closed his eyes for one brief second, like he'd expected the hit and accepted it. "I know I lost the right to ask you for anything." "You vanished." "I know. You let me wait at that train station for 3 hours. His jaw tightened. "I know. You sent one message, 3 words, 'Don't contact me.'" Rosie looked up at him, confused by the silence that followed. Claire's breath was getting shorter. "And now you stand here and say truth?" Mason reached into his coat pocket slowly, carefully, like he was handling something breakable. He held out a sealed envelope. On the front, in a handwriting Claire would have recognized blind, were 4 words. "For Claire, from Arthur." Her father had been dead 8 months. The blood drained from her face. "Your father had his lawyer send this to me," Mason said. "It reached me yesterday. I almost burned it." "Why didn't you?" His eyes flickered to Rosie. "Because my wife is dead. My daughter is all I have left. And when a dead man finally decides to tell the truth, you read it." Before Claire could answer, Damien's voice cut through the sunlight behind her. "What exactly is going on?" She turned. Damien Sterling looked immaculate, even in anger. Midnight tuxedo, perfect hair. The kind of face that magazines called commanding, and ordinary people called dangerous after it was too late. He came down the chapel steps with 3 members of Claire's family trailing behind him, and the expression of a man trying to stay gracious for an audience. Then he saw the envelope. Something changed in his eyes. Not fear, recognition. Just for a second. It was gone so fast Claire almost doubted it. Damien smiled at Mason, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I thought I told security not to let opportunists anywhere near the ceremony." Mason didn't answer him. Claire noticed that. He looked only at her. "Read it before you say I do," he said. Damien slid one hand into his pocket, relaxed, controlled. "Claire, sweetheart, whatever this is, it's clearly not the place. Your father had business with 1,000 people. Grief makes men creative." Rosie peeked around Mason's side, her eyes still glossy. Damien's gaze dropped to her, then to Mason again. "How much?" Claire looked at him sharply. "Excuse me?" Damien kept his voice smooth. "Come on." He brings a child to soften the scene, appears on the day the press is outside, and suddenly there's a mysterious accusation. It's pathetic, but not original. Mason's whole body went still. That kind of stillness wasn't peace. It was the second before a wound opens. "I should break your jaw for speaking about my daughter like that," he said. Damien smiled wider. "And confirm exactly who you are?" Claire looked between them, heart pounding so hard it was making her nauseous. She turned back to Mason. "If this is revenge, it's not. If this is about what happened between us, it should have been, years ago." His voice cracked on that one word and then steadied. "But it isn't. Read the letter." Inside the chapel, someone from the wedding team appeared in the doorway, panicked and whispering that the live stream had been paused. Everything was waiting on Claire. The altar, the vows, the cameras, the lie. She took the envelope with shaking fingers. "I'll read it," she said. Damien stepped toward her. "Claire, I said I'll read it." He didn't touch her. That would have been too public. Instead, he leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "Whatever fantasy you think he dragged in here, handle it fast. We have guests who matter." Claire looked at him. Guests who matter. The words hit different now. When she turned and walked back inside, she didn't look behind her. But she felt it anyway. Mason lifting Rosie back into his arms. Rosie whispering, "Daddy, did we do something bad?" Mason answering in a voice made of splinters, "No, baby, no. Some people just forget how to be human." Claire didn't make it back to the altar. She veered instead into the bridal suite, shut the door, and broke the seal with hands she could barely control. Inside was a letter and a small flash drive taped to the paper. She unfolded the letter first. "Claire, if you are reading this, then death finally did what pride could not. It silenced me long enough for truth to speak. Mason Reed did not abandon you because he stopped loving you. I made sure of that." Claire sat down so fast she nearly missed the chair. Her throat closed. She kept reading. "9 years ago, I had a man waiting at the station before Mason ever got there. I knew you planned to run. I knew because your mother once loved a man I did not approve of, and rich men do not survive long without learning how to recognize desperation in their daughters. Mason's mother needed surgery. His younger brother was one mistake away from prison. I put the bill for one in one hand and the threat for the other in the second. I told him if he did not leave you, I would destroy what remained of his family. He agreed to let you hate him. That was the only honorable thing I ever saw him do for me." Claire stopped reading because she couldn't breathe. Memory flooded in jagged pieces. The train station in the rain. The cheap silver watch Mason used to wear. Her suitcase by her ankles. The text that came at 11:14 p.m. "Don't contact me." She had read it until the words turned to knives. All these years, she had carried that message like proof that love was for weak women and expensive mistakes. And her father had written it into her life with his own hands. There was more. "I must also confess this. Damien Sterling is not the man I pretended he was. Years ago, I helped bury a scandal tied to him because I believed protecting our company protected you. I was wrong. If he has come close enough to marry you, then I have failed twice. The flash drive contains what I should have given the police. Do not repeat my cowardice. If you can still save yourself, do it barefoot if you must. Your father. Claire read that last line twice. Do it barefoot if you must. And suddenly she realized she was, in fact, standing on cold marble with one shoe missing and the whole life she'd built balanced on a lie. There was a knock, then another. Claire? Her mother's voice, tight. Everyone is waiting. Claire folded the letter once, then again. Her fingers found the flash drive. Waiting. No, they were watching. That was different. She opened the door just enough to see her maid of honor, Nora, standing there with wide, frightened eyes. Nora had known Claire since college. She was one of the few people in the mansion who still looked at her like a human being instead of a stock asset. Claire grabbed her wrist and pulled her inside. Do you know who Mason Reed is? Nora swallowed. Yes. Did you know he was coming? A beat too long. That was answer enough. Claire stared at her. Nora! He called me last night, Nora whispered. No, that's not true. I called him first. Claire's heart lurched. What? Nora's eyes filled. I found something in your father's private archive when I was organizing the memorial documents last month. Old legal settlements, police notes. Damien's name kept appearing next to sealed payments. I didn't understand all of it, but I knew enough to be scared. Then your father's attorney mentioned mailing something to Mason Reed, and She shook her head. I thought if anyone deserved to know, it was him. Claire stared at her friend like the room had changed dimensions. You should have told me. I was trying to. Every time I brought up Damien, you looked like a woman holding a roof on her back. That landed because it was true. Claire had not agreed to marry Damien for love. Love had nothing to do with it. Her family empire was bleeding after Arthur's death. Ashford Biotech was drowning in debt hidden behind polished reports and charity galas. Damien's company had offered salvation. Cash infusion, stock protection, board support. Marry him, and the Ashford name survives. Refuse, and the board carves up what her father built and feeds it to competitors before the year is out. Claire had told herself sacrifice was adulthood. That this was what rich daughters did when their fathers left them a kingdom built on rot. But now, Mason Reed was outside holding a child, and her father's ghost had just confessed that the man at the altar was filth in better tailoring. Claire looked at Nora. I need a laptop. Nora handed her one without a word. The flash drive clicked in. A video file loaded. The image was grainy, night vision green, from a camera mounted above a side street downtown. A timestamp glowed in the corner. Claire recognized the date instantly because the city had been full of headlines that week. The death of Hannah Reed. A tragic hit and run. No arrests. On screen, a woman exited a building carrying a folder and talking on her phone. She was tired, moving fast, glancing over her shoulder. Then, headlights surged into frame. Too fast, too direct. The car didn't swerve. It aimed. Claire slapped a hand over her mouth. The impact happened soundlessly in the video, which somehow made it worse. The folder flew open, papers scattered. The body hit the curb. The car braked 20 feet later. For 1 second, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. His face wasn't clear, but the watch on his wrist was. The same limited edition skeleton watch Damien wore almost every day. Claire had bought him a new strap for it 3 months earlier. At the edge of the frame, another car pulled up moments later. Two men got out, grabbed the folder, and drove off before the ambulance ever arrived. Claire felt something inside her go cold enough to cut. "Was this ever given to police?" she asked. Nora shook her head. "I don't know, but if your father kept it, then he buried it." Claire closed the laptop slowly. For a moment, the room was silent except for the distant murmur of guests outside, wondering why the bride had disappeared. Then came another knock, this one harder. Damien. "Claire, open the door." Nora looked terrified. "What do we do?" Claire wiped her tears once, stood up, and became dangerously calm. "First," she said, "you get that video backed up in 3 places." "Claire, now." Nora ran. Damien knocked again. "This is becoming embarrassing." Claire opened the door. He smiled when he saw her face, maybe expecting weakness. Instead, he found something worse. He found a woman who was done being managed. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "No," Claire said. "Were you driving on Mercer Street the night Hannah Reed died?" He didn't answer. That told her more than words could have. His smile thinned. "You let that man upset you before the ceremony." "Answer me." Damien stepped inside and shut the door behind him. His voice dropped all the way down. "Careful." Claire felt fear. Real fear. But fear, she was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as surrender. "Did you kill her?" He sighed like she was exhausting. "This is exactly why your father always kept emotion out of business. My father buried your crimes, and your father understood necessity." The room seemed to tilt. "You're not denying it." Damien's eyes rested on her, flat and polished and dead. "A woman ran into the street waving documents that didn't belong to her. I had people handling a sensitive acquisition. She panicked. It was ugly. Ugly things happen when ordinary people get close to decisions too large for them." Claire's skin went ice cold. "You're talking about a human life." "I'm talking about consequence." She took a step back from him. He took one forward. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "The guests outside include investors whose signatures keep your company alive by Monday. The board votes in 48 hours. If this wedding collapses, your father's legacy is dismantled. Your mother loses the foundation. Your brother loses his treatment trust, and your surname becomes a cautionary tale. So you are going to walk down that aisle, say the vows, and discuss your moral awakening after the merger paperwork is complete." That was the moment Claire finally saw him fully. Not as charming, not as ambitious, not even as cruel. As empty. He thought everything had a price because he had never once been forced to be priceless to anyone. She said very quietly, "Get out of my room." His jaw flexed. "Claire, get out." For one dangerous second, she thought he might refuse. Then footsteps approached from the hallway, and Damien stepped back into his public face like slipping into a coat. When he opened the door, he was smiling again. "Of course," he said. "Take another moment, but not too many." Then he left. Claire waited until the hallway sound faded. Then she ran back outside. Mason was in the parking circle, beside an old pickup truck that looked painfully out of place among the Bentleys and black cars. Rosie sat on the lowered tailgate with a juice box someone from catering had quietly given her. Her cheeks were still pink from crying, and she was drawing on the back of a napkin with a borrowed eyeliner pencil. Mason looked up as Claire approached. He didn't speak. Neither did she at first. She looked at Rosie. "What are you drawing?" Rosie showed her the napkin. It was a little crooked sketch of a princess missing one shoe. Claire let out a laugh that broke in the middle and almost became a sob. Rosie studied her. "Are you sad?" Claire crouched, careful with the heavy dress. Yes. Rosie considered that in the serious way children do when they know adults lie too much. Then she held out the napkin. You can keep it. When I get sad, I draw until my stomach stops hurting. Claire took it like it was something holy. Mason looked away for a second, ashamed and proud at the same time. Rosie, he said gently, give us a minute, okay? She nodded and hopped down, wandering only far enough to look at flowers by the fountain. Claire stood. I watched the video. Mason's face changed, but only slightly, like a wound hearing its own name. And? He asked. And my father was telling the truth. Yeah. It wasn't triumph. It was grief. Claire looked at him. Why didn't you come to me when he threatened you? Why let me believe you chose money? Mason laughed once, without humor. Because I was 26, broke, furious, and your father had my mother's surgery papers on his desk. He told me if I fought him, she'd die waiting. He told me if I went near you again, my brother's parole would vanish under some convenient mistake. Then he handed me a phone and said if I loved you, I'd make you hate me fast. Claire's eyes burned. So you did. I thought hate would heal cleaner than fear. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. I was wrong. She looked toward Rosie, then back at him. And Hannah? For the first time since she had seen him at the doors, Mason looked like he might fall apart. His gaze found his daughter. Hannah worked late because we needed the money. Rosie had asthma. Hospital bills stacked up. One night, Hannah called me and said she'd found something bad at Sterling Capital. She was scared. She said if anything happened, there was a folder. He swallowed hard. I told her to come straight home. Claire already knew she hadn't. She was 20 minutes away, he said. Rosie fell asleep with one shoe on because she wanted to wait up for her mom. His voice went rough. I still can't look at a child half-dressed for bed without hearing the knock on the door. Claire closed her eyes. There it was, the heartbreaking center of it all. Not the billionaires, not the wedding, not even the betrayal. A little girl asleep in one shoe while her mother died under somebody else's money. When Claire opened her eyes again, Mason was staring at the chapel like a man ready to lose twice. I didn't come here to blow up your life, he said. I came because I know how men like Damien survive. They wrap themselves in respectability. They get photographed smiling. They donate to children's hospitals with the same hands that bury women like Hannah. If you marry him today, he wins again. Claire breathed in slowly. Then she asked the question that had waited 9 years to be asked. Did you ever stop loving me? Mason looked stunned by the cruelty of timing. The honesty on his face hurt more than any answer could have. No, he said. But life doesn't freeze because your heart wants it to. He glanced at Rosie. I loved my wife. Differently, imperfectly, but truly. And she deserved more years than she got. Claire nodded, tears slipping down despite herself. That answer was worse and better than a fantasy. It was real. A shout came from the chapel entrance. Nora. Claire! They turned. Nora was running, breathless, phone in hand. The board's legal counsel is here. Damien's moving the asset transfer up. He wants signatures before the vows in case you make a scene. Claire went still. Of course he does. Nora reached them. I sent the files to an investigative reporter I trust and to the district attorney's emergency tip line. But if we want to stop the wedding before he gains control, it has to happen in that room. Mason stepped back immediately. Then do it. Claire looked at him. Come with me. No. The answer surprised both women. Mason shook his head. If I walk in beside you, he turns this into a jealous ex, a grieving widower, class resentment. He'll use me to muddy the truth. He looked down at his daughter. Besides, Rosie's had enough for one day. Rosie had wandered back close enough to hear her name. She tugged Mason's sleeve. "Daddy?" He knelt. "Yeah, Bug? Are we going home?" He looked at Claire over Rosie's head, and in that look was everything unsaid. "If you walk away now, I won't stop you. If you go back in there, do it for yourself. Don't do it for me. Don't do it because of what we were. Do it because bad men have been eating your silence for years." Rosie touched his cheek. Then she asked, in that soft, devastating way children ask the question adults spend their whole lives dodging. "If we leave, does the bad man get to stay good?" Mason stared at her. Claire did too. Rosie frowned, trying to explain herself. "Because everybody in there thinks he's fancy." That was it. That was the whole disease in one sentence. Claire stood up so fast the veil slipped completely from her hair and fell into the gravel. She didn't pick it up. "Tell them to open the live feed again," she said to Nora. Nora blinked. "What are you going to do?" Claire looked at the chapel doors. What my father was too cowardly to do. When the music restarted, the guests relaxed. That was the first mistake. They saw the bride return, barefoot, eyes dry now, posture straight as glass, and assumed whatever problem had wandered in from the parking lot had been handled. Damien smiled with relief when Claire took her place opposite him again. That was his mistake. The officiant cleared his throat. "We gather here today. Before we begin," Claire said, turning to the audience, "I'd like to play one final message from my father." A murmur of softened emotion moved through the room. Perfect, Damien must have thought. Legacy, tribute, sentiment. He even nodded toward the AV team. The giant projection screen behind the floral arch lit up. Arthur Ashford's face appeared, older, tired, unvarnished. Not a memorial montage, a confession. The room changed temperature in seconds. Arthur spoke directly to the camera. "If this message is being shown at Claire's wedding, then I pray I am too dead to interfere." Nervous laughter tried to begin and failed. Damien's expression flickered. Arthur kept going. "I separated my daughter from the only man who ever loved her without calculating her value. I buried a violent crime committed by the man she is about to marry. I told myself I was protecting a company. That is the favorite lie of cowards in expensive offices." Gasps broke out across the first 3 rows. Claire did not look at Damien. She looked at the faces of the donors, the board, the women who'd complimented her dress an hour earlier, the men who respected her father because they had benefited from his rot. On screen, Arthur named Hannah Reed, named Mercer Street, named sealed payments, police favors, and the watch Damien Sterling wore the night he stepped over a dying woman and saved his own future first. Damien grabbed Claire's wrist, hard. She turned her face toward him slowly. The camera caught that too. "Turn it off," he hissed. Claire pulled her hand free. "No." He stepped toward the screen, but Nora had already signaled the staff to lock the controls. The chapel erupted. Some guests stood, some reached for phones. Claire's mother sat down like her bones had gone missing. Julian, Claire's younger brother, stared at Damien with open horror. Then Damien made his worst decision. He forgot the room had already stopped belonging to him. He laughed. Actually laughed. "This is a dead man covering his own scandal," he said loudly. "A senile recording, a spurned ex, and a woman having a bridal panic attack. Is this really the circus you want on your name, Claire?" She stared at him. Then she lifted a microphone with a hand that no longer shook. My name has survived worse than truth. He took one step toward her. From the back of the chapel, a voice cut through everything. That's enough. Mason. He had come back after all. Not grandly, not like a hero in a movie. He came back because some lines, once crossed, demand a witness. Rosie wasn't with him. Nora had arranged for one of the older housekeepers to keep her in the bridal suite with cookies and cartoons. Mason walked down the aisle slowly, eyes locked on Damien. The guests parted without meaning to. Damien sneered. You again. Mason stopped several feet away. You spent 2 years making me feel crazy for what I knew. Today, you don't get to hide behind her. Damien lunged first. Not a punch, a shove. A desperate, ugly shove that sent flowers crashing from their stands and revealed him exactly as he was. Mason hit the edge of a pew, grunted, steadied himself. Security rushed in, but this time they didn't grab Mason. They grabbed Damien. Because the district attorney's investigators had arrived through the side entrance while the confession played, and because rich men are fearless only until handcuffs enter the room. Damien thrashed. Do you know who I am? One investigator answered flatly. Yeah, that's why we came in person. The sight of Damien Sterling being pulled down the same aisle he had expected to rule was so sharp, so humiliating, so complete that nobody in the room dared breathe too loudly. He looked at Claire one last time, panic finally cracking through the polish. You destroy this wedding, you destroy yourself. Claire took off the engagement ring, set it on the altar, and said, Then let something honest finally survive me. They let him out. No music played. No one clapped. The silence was too sacred for that. A wedding had died. But something else had walked out alive. Later, after the guests had scattered, after the reporters screamed from beyond the gates, after Claire gave a statement that would torch half the board and most of her social life, she found Mason outside near the fountain. The sun was lower now. The flowers looked tired. Rosie was asleep in his truck, cheek pressed to the window, still holding the paper napkin with the one-shoe princess drawn on it. Claire stood beside him without speaking. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she said, I spent 9 years hating the wrong man. Mason looked at the water. I spent 9 years thinking maybe that was easier for you. It wasn't. I know. She laughed once through tears. You always did answer too late. He gave the smallest smile. There it was. Not a fairy tale, not a reset button. Just the exhausted, tender shape of 2 people who had lived too much to confuse truth with magic. Claire looked at Rosie sleeping in the truck. I'm sorry for what happened to Hannah. Mason nodded slowly. Me too. Every day. And I'm sorry for what happened to you. That one landed deeper. He looked at her then, not as the girl from the train station, not as the bride from the chapel, as the woman who had finally chosen cost over cowardice. Sorry doesn't give us back time, he said. No. But it gives it a name. Claire nodded. Then she reached into the back seat where the abandoned bouquet had been tossed during the chaos. She took out one white orchid and tucked it carefully beside Rosie's hand, near the crumpled drawing. Rosie stirred awake, blinked at Claire through the glass, and rubbed one eye. Did you still get married? She mumbled when Mason opened the door. Claire smiled, sad and real and free. No, sweetheart. Rosie looked at the flowers, then at Claire's bare feet. Good, she said. Princesses shouldn't marry bad guys. Mason laughed so suddenly it almost broke him. Claire did too, and for the first time all day, the sound didn't hurt. In the weeks that followed, the city tore itself apart over the scandal. Stocks fell. Names resurfaced. Arthur Ashford's confession lit fires in rooms that had been dark for decades. Damien was charged. The hit-and-run case reopened. Hannah Reid's name was spoken on every channel with the dignity money had once stolen from her. Claire testified against her own father's empire. She lost friends who had only ever loved her seating chart. She gained a spine no one could buy. Mason was cleared publicly of the lies that had shadowed him. A civil settlement ensured Rosie would never have to wait for an inhaler because a bill came first. But the real victory wasn't money. It was that Hannah was no longer a headline. She was a woman, a mother, a truth. And on a gray Sunday weeks later, Claire stood beside Mason at Hannah's grave in a plain black coat with mud on her heels and no camera in sight. She didn't speak first. She just set down a white orchid and stepped back. Mason looked at the stone, then at Claire. "This isn't simple." "No," she said. "It shouldn't be." He studied her face, maybe searching for the old girl, maybe relieved not to find her. Rosie ran between them, chasing a yellow leaf, and shouted, "Daddy, look!" Mason looked. So did Claire. And somehow, that was the beginning, not of a perfect love story, but of an honest one. The kind that doesn't arrive in silk and violins, the kind that crawls out of ruin, bruised and breathing, and asks for one more chance to be treated gently. Some weddings end with vows. Hers ended with the truth, barefoot and uninvited, walking straight through the front doors. Tell me in the comments, if you were Claire, would you have gone back to the altar or run the moment you saw him being dragged away?